Boom 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 boom.
Okay, let's unpack this. We're diving headfirst into a really fascinating collision today, exploring some exciting edges of visual storytelling, where new tech meets old techniques.
Absolutely. We're talking about the intersection of virtual reality, VR, and the incredibly tactile, very handmade craft of stop-motion animation.
Yeah, that sounds like two completely different worlds, doesn't it?
It really does. One's all digital immersion, the other's so physical.
So what sources are guiding our deep dive today? What are we working with?
Well, we've got a great analysis of an award-winning VR animation called Gloomy Eyes. It's a fantastic case study for atmosphere and narrative in VR.
Okay.
Then we have some incredibly detailed insights into the challenges and the innovations, too, involved in bringing Phil Tippett's huge project, Mad God, into VR, the one he worked on for decades.
Oh, wow, Mad God in VR. That's ambitious.
Definitely. And we'll pull in some notes from other experiments, too, things like the Rose.
Excellent. So our mission here, really, for you listening, is to use these sources to kind of cut through the hype and understand how VR is genuinely changing storytelling.
Right. And how does something so physical like stop motion find its place? Not just fit in, but maybe offer something unique.
Exactly. And ultimately, what does all this experimentation mean for how you might experience stories down the line?
That's the journey. We probably need to start by really getting a handle on the core VR experience itself. What is it about being in that world that feels so different?
Makes sense. Then maybe take that understanding and look closely at Gloomy Eyes. See how creators actually build that immersive feeling, use space, light, guide the story.
Perfect. And then finally, we can really get hands-on with the stop-motion side. Look at the specific technical problems and, maybe more interestingly, the aesthetic gifts that bringing something like Mad God into VR actually revealed.
Sounds like a plan. Let's dive in.
Okay, so the sources make it pretty clear right off the bat. VR isn't just, a fancy new screen.
Right. It's fundamentally a storytelling tool. It's designed to change your relationship with the story itself, pulling you out of your seat and, well, right into the middle of it.
Exactly. That's where concepts like telepresence become so important. It's that feeling, that really powerful sensation of physically being there.
In the virtual place.
Yeah.
Unlike a TV or a movie screen where the story is just presented to you.
Yeah. In VR, the world literally wraps around you. It's everywhere you look.
And this brings us to those two key ideas the sources keep mentioning. Immersion, which is that feeling of being completely enveloped, sort of swallowed up by the virtual environment.
And presence, which is maybe even stronger, that real sense of being there, like your body is physically located inside that other world.
And this focus, this intensity can be so complete, it triggers what psychologists call a flow state, right, where you just lose track of time.
Totally absorbed, yeah. And interestingly, one of the sources even draws this really cool parallel.
Oh, yeah.
Between this deep immersive presence in VR and the collective storytelling rituals of ancient times.
Really? How so?
Well, the idea is you're not just a passive observer watching things happen. You're more like a participant in those old communal stories. You're kind of co-inhabiting the story space, experiencing it from the inside.
Living inside the story, not just watching it. That's a powerful idea.
It really is. And that sense of co-inhabiting, of being present within the narrative, leads us nicely to Gloomy Eyes. The sources definitely point to it as a great example of compelling VR storytelling.
It won awards, right, back in 2019.
Yep, made quite a splash. And the premise itself is pretty intriguing.
A love story, but set in a world where the sun, never rises. Between a zombie boy and a human girl.
Exactly. A unique setup. And technically, the sources really emphasize its use of 6 degrees of freedom, 6-OF.
Okay, what does that mean in practice?
It means your actual physical head movements, looking up, down, turning, leaning, are directly tracked and mirrored in the virtual world.
Ah, so that immediately connects your body to the virtual space, reinforces that I am here feeling.
Precisely. But the analysis of Gloomy Eyes makes an interesting point here. While you have all that freedom to look around...
You can't actually do anything.
Right. You're not an active player. You can't intervene or change the plot. You're positioned more as a close observer, maybe a privileged witness.
So the sources suggest that was a deliberate choice, to keep the focus on the narrative they wanted to tell.
Seems like it. Prioritizing that guided experience over, say, interactive gameplay. And that experience is really built on atmosphere.
How'd they build that?
Through these incredibly detailed 3D environments, very distinct character designs, and especially through really clever use of light.
The sources mentioned something called a diorama effect. What's that about?
Yeah, it's fascinating. It apparently feels like you're looking down at a tiny, beautifully crafted miniature theater stage.
Okay, like a model world.
But at the same time, you also feel like you're inside it. It's this weird simultaneous sense of being both outside looking in and inside looking around. Creates this very specific, almost dreamlike scale.
That collapses the distance, doesn't it? It makes it intimate. And the visual style.
Very striking. People often compare it to Tim Burton's work, that gothic fairy tale kind of vibe.
Dark, a bit moody, but still sort of whimsical.
Exactly. And there's a neat detail the sources pick up on about the characters themselves. They look like they're made of clay or some physical material, like old school claymation.
Oh, interesting.
And the sources say that was totally intentional, designed to evoke nostalgia, you know? Like playing with old, tangible toys from your childhood.
Huh. That connects the digital back to something physical, familiar. Adds a layer of warmth, maybe, to the dark themes.
Yeah, I think so. And the lighting, as I mentioned, is really smart. In the dark scenes especially, light isn't just about seeing. It's used almost like whispers.
Whispers.
Yeah, subtly highlighting where you should look, guiding your attention, directing the drama within that 3D space without being obvious about it.
Like a soft virtual spotlight that feels natural.
Yeah.
And the story itself.
Yeah.
Classic forbidden love, exclusion.
Yeah, familiar themes, but the presentation is pure VR. You have an external narrator. Colin Farrell did the English voice, the sources mention.
Yes.
And that, combined with really rich sound design and music, just completes the whole immersive atmosphere. The creators even said, according to the sources, that it's not quite a film, not quite a game.
But something new, something different.
Exactly. Captures that feeling of a medium finding its own language.
Okay, so that gives us a good picture of VR's power to create atmosphere, using gloomy eyes as a guide. But what happens when you throw something completely physical, completely handmade, like the puppets and textures of Phil Tippett's Mad God, into that virtual space?
Yeah. This is where the sources show things got complicated.
The collision wasn't smooth.
Not at all. Merging that physical reality of stop motion with the precise digital needs of VR, that threw up some major technical hurdles.
Like what? The sources mentioned they first tried something that seemed logical, shooting the whole set.
Right. The initial idea was, let's just capture the entire stop motion set, maybe with photogrammetry or something, and drop it into VR.
Sounds reasonable. Why didn't it work?
Well, it turned out to be incredibly prone to errors, just an absolute nightmare for the animators, because in VR, even a tiny millimeter-level mistake in where a puppet was or the camera angle
Was massive.
Exactly. Jarringly huge. It completely breaks that sense of presence, that feeling of being in a real, stable world.
Okay, so total rethink needed. What solution did they end up finding, according to the sources?
They shifted to a more layered approach. They started shooting the moving parts, the characters, key props separately, often against a green screen or a clean background.
Right, isolating the elements.
Then they'd bring all those separate layers into professional compositing software like Nuke and digitally combine them in the virtual space.
Ah, so building the scene digitally from physical components. That gives you much more control, I guess.
Total control over each piece. It let them position everything perfectly in 3D space and create that necessary virtual depth. But even just generating the stereo image.
The separate view for each eye.
Yeah, the thing that actually creates the 3D effect in VR, that itself was a huge learning process for the team. They really had to figure that out.
And this is where it gets really interesting, technically. Tackling scale perception.
Oh, this part is brilliant. Think about it, right? Stop-motion puppets are usually tiny, maybe, 10, 15 centimeters tall?
Little handcrafted figures?
Exactly. So you, a full-size person, put on a VR headset, you're dropped into this world built around these tiny puppets. How does your brain make sense of that?
Yeah. Do I feel like a giant looking down? Or am I supposed to feel like I'm their size? That's crucial for feeling present, isn't it?
Absolutely critical.
Yeah.
If the scale feels wrong, the immersion shatters. So how did they solve it?
What was the trick?
The sources describe this incredibly clever hack. They adjusted the distance between the virtual eyes, the virtual cameras rendering the scene. It's called the interocular distance.
Okay. The space between your eyes.
Normally in VR, you'd set that to match a typical human eye distance. But here, they adjusted it way down to match the tiny distance between the puppet's eyes. maybe only a centimeter or so apart.
Wait, seriously. So the virtual viewpoint was effectively seeing the world as if it were the tiny puppet.
That's exactly it. And the effect is apparently astonishing. By matching your virtual eye distance to the puppet's scale, your brain interprets the small puppets as being roughly your size.
Whoa.
You suddenly feel like you're in their world, existing at their scale, not looming over this miniature set.
That is genuinely mind-bending. It's like tricking your own perception to fit the art.
It totally is, and it's that kind of brilliant technical workaround that lets the unique aesthetic of stop motion really shine in VR. The sources nail it with this summary. It looks real because it has physical material.
Right, you see the clay, the paint, the textures.
But it also isn't real because they are puppets and monsters.
That's the magic, isn't it? That tension. The realness of the materials, but the complete unreality of the forms. It must create this incredibly textured physical feeling that purely digital stuff maybe lacks.
A totally unique fusion. It really leverages the best of both worlds. And the creators themselves, the sources say, stress that nobody in VR has all the answers yet.
Which is exciting, right? It means there's room to experiment.
Exactly. They see it as this incredibly fertile ground for creativity. And their work on Mad God in VR really shows how leaning into that tactile, handmade quality of stop motion can open up entirely new avenues for immersion and style in a digital medium.
Okay, let's try and pull this all together then. We've taken quite a deep dive into the sources today, looking at this really interesting mix of VR's immersive feel and stop motion's tangible craft.
Yeah, we saw how VR, like in Gloomy Eyes, can really reshape how a story feels by putting you right inside the atmosphere, making you an inhabitant, not just a viewer.
And then, with Mad God, we explored the flip side, the real technical struggles, but also the brilliant solutions needed to bring something so physical into the digital realm, and how that physicality adds this unique texture, this sort of grounded reality, even to monstrous puppets.
What seems really clear from all this is that storytelling methods are always shifting, always evolving with the tech. VR's big promise seems to be moving you from just watching to actually inhabiting the world.
And maybe surprisingly, old school techniques like stop motion aren't being left behind. They're bringing something vital, that physical texture, that sense of material reality into these otherwise purely digital spaces.
And maybe the biggest takeaway, the most interesting insight from these sources, is that feeling real in VR isn't just about having super high-res graphics.
Right, it's more fundamental.
Yeah, it's deeply tied to getting your physical relationship to that world right. Things like scale and distance and viewpoint, nailing those perceptions like they did with that amazing interocular distance trick in Mad God.
It's about how your brain and body feel positioned within that space, not just what your eyes see.
Exactly. So thinking about these increasingly sophisticated, immersive VR worlds that are coming, and how creators are blending digital and physical techniques to make you feel truly there.
It definitely raises a big question, doesn't it? A question for you, the listener, really. How much control, how much agency would you actually want in these future VR experiences?
Yeah, would you prefer to be that invisible witness? Able to look anywhere, feel present, but ultimately just observing the story unfold, like the sources suggest Gloomy Eyes aimed for.
Or do you want more? Do you want to be able to interact, to influence things, maybe even change the direction of the story?
It points to this really interesting balancing act, doesn't it, between the creator's intended narrative, the depth of the story they want to tell,
And the freedom of interaction and exploration that VR makes possible. Where should that balance lie?
It's a fascinating question, and definitely something to think about as these immersive frontiers keep expanding.
Boom 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 boom.